Welcome to Across the Balkans. I'm Nafisa Latic. It's great to have your company. Several Balkan officials have joined world leaders in expressing their condolences to the Iranian people after the death of President Ebrahim Raisi in a helicopter crash on May 19. Others were silent, depending on their relations with Teheran. Iran declared 5 days of mourning and is preparing to elect a new president at the end of June. This week, we'll look closer into Iran's relations with the region and what comes next after Raisi. Yasemin Çolakolu reports.
Iranians have come together to mourn their president, Ebrahim Raisi, who died in a helicopter crash on Sunday. Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdullahian and 7 other people were also killed. The helicopter carrying Raisi and his entourage was crossing mountain terrain near the border with Azerbaijan in poor weather. Iran has launched an official investigation into the crash. But questions have been raised as to whether Raisi should have been traveling on a helicopter believed to have been decades old. Foreign sanctions on Iran, dating back to the 1979 revolution, have weakened the country's aircraft fleet. The crash shocked Iran as well as the world. There were messages of condolences from world leaders. Several Balkan officials issued statements as well, depending on the state of their relations with Tehran. Member of the presidency of Bosnia and Herzegovina, Željko Komšić, expressed his condolences in a telegram to Iran. Bakir Izetbegović, the president of the Party of Democratic Action and son of wartime Bosnian President Alija Izetbegović, expressed his sorrow, offering prayers for the deceased and their families. Iran's relations with the Western Balkans date back to the times of the former Yugoslavia. Iran was one of the main Yugoslav trading partners in Asia, but the volume of trade dropped off significantly following the breakup of the country. When the war started in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Iran was one of the first countries to support Bosnian Muslims. Arms and volunteer troops were sent to help when they were attacked by Bosnian Serbs. Nearly 3 decades later, Serbia has had the most extensive economic relations with Iran. After Russia's attack on Ukraine, the two countries have worked together to find alternative sources for oil and fertilizer. Serbia also plans to export wheat to Iran. President Aleksandar Vučić was the first leader to react to Raisi's death on the day of the accident. He took to social media again on Monday, calling Raisi a loyal and true friend of Serbia. Former Vice President Mohamed Mokber is now the interim president. On June 28th, presidential elections will be held, and we shall see what impact there will be on Iran's domestic and foreign policy. And will there be any change in strategy towards the region as well? Yasemin Çolakolu, Across the Balkans.
Joining me now to discuss this is Giorgio Cafiero, CEO of Gulf State Analytics. That's a Washington-based geopolitical risk consultancy. Giorgio, great to have you with us on Across the Balkans. Now, what did we learn about the relations between the Balkan nations and Iran following a sudden death of Ebrahim Raisi?
Well, I think when we look at the reaction from the Serbian government, it really underscores that in the Western Balkans, it's really Serbia that is, I think, hands down Iran's best friend. I know the president of Serbia took to social media to express his condolences very quickly. A number of Serbian ministers went to the Iranian embassy in Belgrade to sign a book of condolences. Really underscores the extent to which Iran and Serbia have grown so close in recent years.
And how close was this relationship between President Vučić and Raisi?
Well, during Raisi's time as the president of Iran, Tehran and Belgrade certainly strengthened bilateral relations across a host of domains. I think when we're talking about Serbia's foreign policy, we have to, of course, keep in mind that the Kosovo issue is the most important file. And the fact that Iran is a very influential country in the Islamic world that does not recognize Kosovo's independence has made Iran very important in the eyes of Serbian officials. At the same time, I think Iran views Serbia as a very special country because Serbia does not always go along with what the U.S. and Western countries want. There is sort of an independent approach that Serbia takes to international relations, and Serbia has, of course, condemned and criticized the West's sanctions against Iran. Earlier this year, when Iran was hit with a terrorist attack, the Serbian leadership was quick to express solidarity with the Iranians and to show support for Iran's efforts to fight violent extremist groups that wage terror acts inside of Iran. It's very, like I said, the Iranians see Serbia as a very special country that's very friendly to Iran, despite being in the heart of Europe.
How significant is the fact that both countries, Serbia and Iran, are strongly against NATO? How bonding was that for the two countries?
Well, there certainly is some common cause. Both Iran and Serbia view themselves as victims of NATO aggression in the past. Of course, I think we should bring a bit of nuance into this conversation. Serbia definitely does coordinate with NATO quite a bit. Serbia is also an EU candidate. It also has very deep economic ties with Western countries, and there's no doubt that the Western sanctions on Iran have certainly put some limits on Serbia's relationship with Iran. Nonetheless, I think what has to be stated is that both Belgrade and Tehran try to take somewhat of a non-aligned approach to international relations. At least there's a strong history of that. And I think in many ways you can make the argument that Iran and Serbia approach geopolitics in very similar ways. Neither of these countries wants to be sort of pushed around by the West.
We've heard from Iran's supreme leader, nothing much will change following Raisi's death when it comes to the approach to the way Iran will be led in the future. The foreign minister of the country has been killed as well in that crash. How difficult will be to fill that void? We've seen him coming quite often in Bosnia as well and other countries in the region. Can we expect a shift in Iran's foreign policy towards the Balkans now?
I certainly would not expect Iran's foreign policy toward the Balkans to change much as a consequence of the recent death of the president and the foreign minister. As so many analysts have pointed out, when it comes to Iran's foreign policy, the supreme leader is in the driver's seat. And as long as this supreme leader is still in power, I don't think we're going to see any of the fundamentals of Tehran's foreign policy change.
And how would you describe, just briefly, I have 1 minute left, how would you describe Tehran's approach to the Balkans, looking back to the former Yugoslavia time and then until then? Let's not forget that during the war times, Iranians stood with Bosnian Muslims during the aggression by Bosnian Serbs, and they even sent weapons to them. And now, 3 decades later, neighboring Serbia is their closest ally.
It's a great question. And yeah, there's no doubt that when the Bosnian War was taking place in the 1990s, the Bosnian Muslims turned to Iran for support at a time in which the West was kind of playing a both sides blame game vis-a-vis Bosnia. That certainly earned the Iranians much goodwill in Sarajevo. And after that conflict ended in 1995, we saw Iran use religion, education, charity, and culture to assert its influence in Bosnia. But over the years, Bosnia has shifted its geopolitical orientation really away from Iran and much closer to the West's geopolitical orbit. We've also seen Iran and Russia come into closer alignment, whether we're talking about Syria or other issues, including the Ukraine conflict. And that has been one of the geopolitical trends that I think has certainly contributed to Serbia emerging as Iran's closest friend in the Balkans. Really a story, when we talk about Iran and Serbia, it's really a story of countries that went from being enemies to good friends, in a relatively short period of time.
Giorgio Cafiero, thank you for being our guest on Across the Balkans.